I woke up to the sound of a blender in my cornfield. At first, I figured it was a dream, maybe even some ambitious raccoons had leveled up from stealing eggs to making post-dawn smoothies. But then I glanced out the window and saw a sea of nylon tents, lawn chairs, and someone in yoga pants striking a warrior pose on top of my hay bales. This wasn't a dream. This was a full-on invasion. A hand-painted banner flapped in the breeze, proudly declaring, HOA Wellness Weekend Retreat. I swear, there was a man in a glittery robe leading a meditation circle like he was some fringe cult leader. I hadn't rented my land out. I hadn't agreed to anything. Heck, no one had even asked. Yet there they were, chanting Kumbaya, sipping mimosas, and treating my farm like it was the VIP section at some New Age Coachella for suburban escapists. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. That surreal morning would kick off one of the most ridiculous, dramatic, and bizarre weeks of my life. The HOA had declared war on my farm. And they had no clue who they were messing with. I woke up to the sound of a blender outside in my cornfield. At first, I figured I was dreaming, maybe the raccoons had finally advanced past stealing eggs and moved on to crafting breakfast smoothies. But one glance out the window shattered that illusion. A sea of nylon tents. Foldable lounge chairs. Someone in yoga pants doing the warrior pose, on top of my hay bales. This wasn't a dream. This was a full-on invasion. A handmade banner flapped in the wind, proudly proclaiming, HOA Wellness Weekend Retreat. And I kid you not, there was a man in a sequined robe guiding a meditation circle like he was the guru of a yoga cult. I hadn't leased out my land. Hadn't given anyone permission. Hadn't even been approached. Yet there they were, singing Kumbaya, sipping mimosas, desecrating my property like it was Coachella for spoiled suburbanites. What I didn't realize was that morning would be the start of one of the wildest, most absurd, and mind-boggling weeks of my life. Because the HOA had just declared war on my farm. And they had no idea who they were dealing with. I threw on my boots, skipped the coffee, and stormed out the door, Duke, the dog, trotting right behind me, tail wagging like we were just heading out to check on the fence. I passed the barn and stomped down the gravel path toward the field, where the camping crowd looked like they'd crawled out of some glossy lifestyle catalog. There were pop-up tents, inflatable lounges, someone piloting a drone, and yes, a full-on portable espresso setup running off a stolen extension cord that I followed straight back to my irrigation outlet. It was 7:14 a.m., and I was already brimming with rage. I got halfway there when a woman in a salmon-colored pantsuit stepped into my path like a velvet rope bouncer. "Good morning," she chirped. "We're just setting up for the morning sound bath. Want to join? We've got extra mats." I blinked. "This is my land." She tilted her head, like I was speaking gibberish. "Oh. You must be the neighbor." "No. I own this field. That barn. That tractor. That cow that's looking at you like you owe her alfalfa. All mine." Her smile faltered, and she let out a dramatic gasp. "Oh, this is awkward. Rick told us it was fine to camp here." "You know Rick, our HOA liaison?" "There is no Rick," I said flatly. She frowned, like I'd just questioned her religion. "Well. Rick reserved it for the weekend. I'll go get Cornita. She's our president." Of course there was a Karen. And naturally, this one had upgraded to a Latin-flavored version, Cornita. Which sounded less like a person and more like a brand of wine cooler. Sure enough, a few minutes later, she arrived in oversized sunglasses, a glittery visor, flanked by two clipboard-toting assistants, sipping cucumber water like she was hosting a corporate summit. "You must be the caretaker," she said, smiling like I was just a hiccup in her agenda. "Owner. And what the hell are you doing on my property?" Her lips curled into that smug smile people wear before saying something truly unhinged. "We're holding a wellness retreat for our HOA board and a few honored members. Rick, our social outreach officer, coordinated it. We were told this was part of the shared green belt. There is no shared green belt. This is a functioning farm." "Well," she said, waving her manicured fingers like they could erase facts, "we're already set up and the itinerary is locked. Yoga at 8. Journaling at 9. Kombucha truck at 10. You brought a kombucha truck to my farm?" "Technically, it's a mobile hydration unit." I was ready to start yelling, but then someone turned on a massive speaker and started blasting pan flute music. A barefoot man in a silk kimono began twirling through my corn rows. Duke barked. One of my cows looked mortally offended. "You've got 10 minutes to clear out before I call the sheriff," I said. Cornita didn't blink. "We've reviewed our bylaws." "Your bylaws mean nothing here." She'd scared. "No need for hostility. We're bringing visibility and positive energy to your land." "Visibility? This is a cornfield, not a damn art exhibit." She gave me a shrug, turned on her heel, and barked orders into a Bluetooth headset. Her lackeys started setting up a crystal altar between the tomato rows. I stood there, dumbfounded. I'd seen a lot in my time: tractor drag races, barn weddings gone rogue, even a goat that got drunk off fermented apples. But this? This was next level. They hadn't just wandered in. They came in with granola, sage sticks, and squatters' rights like it was Coachella for entitled suburbanites. I called up the sheriff's office, but they were understaffed and told me someone would swing by when they could. Which, in rural speak, meant sometime between now and the apocalypse. I texted my neighbor June. She replied with just one line. "Don't you dare do anything until I get there with popcorn." For the rest of the morning, I stood there like I'd wandered into an alternate dimension. They built an obstacle course using hay bales. Tried meditating with the cows. One guy even mistook my beehives for some kind of artisanal honey sampling station. He got stung on the ear and blamed the hostile chakra energy radiating from the pasture. I gave talking to Cornita one last try. But she was knee-deep in a healing circle, everyone writing their HOA grievances on dissolvable paper and dropping them into my irrigation ditch like they were letting go of trauma. "You're going to regret this," I told her. She gave me a beatific smile. "We believe in love here. You won't once the cows come through." She laughed. That smug little laugh people use when they think you're bluffing. Like the idea of cows crashing her essential oil enlightenment seminar was so ridiculous it had to be a joke. What she didn't know, and what she was about to find out, is that on this farm, the cows weren't just animals. They weren't just milk machines. They weren't background scenery for her Instagram followers. They were blood. They were history. They were family. And family takes trespassing real personal. The next morning, I woke up and discovered the invasion had leveled up. What was once a chaotic little tent town had morphed overnight into a full-blown HOA command center. They'd hung solar-powered fairy lights between my fence posts.
Planted handmade signs that said things like Peace Grove and Harmony Field. And set up a welcome booth staffed by a bored teenager in a neon vest. He claimed to be the parking compliance officer. When I asked where his car was, he pointed to a patch of destroyed zucchini, where 6 sedans were packed in like a carpool clown show. My corn was stomped. 2 tomato plants had been repositioned to improve the meditation zone's feng shui. And at least 4 people were wandering around with lanyards, like this was some farm-themed spiritual TED Talk. Down at the far edge of the field, someone had erected a temporary arch made out of pool noodles and glitter tape. Beneath it stood a man with a clipboard and a top knot, welcoming guests with both hands and chirping. "Welcome to your weekend of personal realignment." I was mid-stomp toward him when I spotted Cornita again. She now wore a flowing paisley robe and wielded a wireless mic like she was hosting a pageant. "Good morning, campers," she said into the mic. Let's take a moment to thank Mother Earth and Farmer Jim for this sacred land. My name's not Jim, I called out. It's Dan, and you're still trespassing. A few people clapped, like I was part of the act. One lady near the hay bales shouted, "We love your vibe, Jim." My blood pressure was climbing. But instead of blowing up, I turned and walked straight back toward the barn. Not to surrender, but to gather witnesses. When I got to June's place, she already had 2 lawn chairs out and a thermos she called observation whiskey. She handed me a glass and pulled up a live stream on her phone. Apparently, my nephew had hidden a camera near the cow pasture. He titled the stream, "HOA Takes the Farm." 15,000 viewers. The comment section was gold. Is this a cult? Can we airdrop glitter from a crop duster? This is wild. June took a sip and said, "This is about to go nuclear. You gonna let it fizzle out or light it up?" I didn't answer right away. On the stream, we watched the HOA folks trying to dress one of my goats in a flower crown. That's when it clicked. These people weren't going to leave because of a stern phone call. They needed a rural-style education, a return to natural law, cause and effect, action and consequence. And lucky for me, I had access to one of the most effective chaos agents known to man, cows. Back at the barn, I grabbed my notebook. Every farmer's got one. A battered, spiral-bound collection of wild ideas, fix-it lists, and mildly illegal schemes scribbled between feedings and fence mends. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote 2 words across the top. Operation Mumageddon. The plan was elegantly simple. If these yoga-loving trespassers wanted to frolic in a field, let's see how well they did when that field was shared with 30 semi-curious, easily startled bovines. I didn't intend to hurt anyone. Just let the cows reintroduce themselves. In that unpredictable, clumsy, slightly drooling way only cows can manage. First, I needed bait. So I headed to the feed store and picked up 2 mineral blocks, a bucket of molasses, and a couple salt licks shaped like apples. Cows love those things. And I had a perfect location near the edge of the encampment. Close enough to tempt, just far enough to make them wander. Second, I needed backup. I called Jimmy, a retired rodeo clown with no filter, flexible morals, and a knack for chaos. He owed me a favor after I rescued him from a ditch last summer. Long story, moonshine and a rogue llama were involved. Jimmy was thrilled. Said he'd bring his lucky boot and a collection of air horns. The next morning, while the HOA did sunrise tai chi to a pan flute remix of Sweet Caroline, I crept along the fence and dropped the bait. The cows noticed immediately. Mabel let out a curious moo and nudged Buttercup. They stared at the treats like toddlers spotting a cookie jar. Meanwhile, the HOA doubled down. Cornita had erected a full town hall tent. They were taking votes to expand the retreat zone into my orchard. Someone floated the idea of hammocks in the pear trees. Another wanted to rebrand my entire property as a community wellness sanctuary. They were trying to annex my farm with yoga mats and committee decisions. That afternoon, hidden behind my tool shed, I saw Jimmy roll in with his truck, a rusty beast plastered with bumper stickers that read things like "Clowns Know Best" and "Honk if you love mayhem." He climbed into the loft, loaded his horns, and gave me a thumbs up. We were almost ready. The final piece? Timing. Every afternoon, without fail, Cornita led Harmony Hour. A mix of karaoke, group breathing, and spritzers. It was loud. It was weird. And it would perfectly mask the thundering of hooves. I went home, popped a fresh batch of popcorn, and waited. Duke curled up beside me, tail wagging like he knew something fun was coming. Soon enough, nature would do what it does best. Remind people who really runs the pasture. That evening, right on cue, the first off-key notes of "Let It Go" drifted across the field. Cornita, now in a sparkling blue cape, belted out the lyrics with such drama, I nearly abandoned the entire mission from sheer secondhand shame. But then I saw it. Movement. The cows were stirring. Mabel led the way, her eyes locked onto the molasses tub like it was a beacon from cow heaven. Buttercup followed. Then Daisy. Then the whole herd. Jimmy signaled from the loft. Air horns locked and loaded. The cows were in formation. The HOA. Clueless. Across the field, Harmony Hour was in full swing. Cornita crooned into her microphone. Someone banged on a bongo. A guy in cargo shorts spun slowly, eyes closed, whispering gratitude. They had no idea they were seconds away from full bovine chaos. The cows weren't angry. Cows don't really get angry. But they were intrigued. They'd spent the night near the bait, eyeing the encampment like explorers sizing up a new land. The salt licks were half gone, the molasses had tongue trails. To most, they looked like lazy animals basking in the sun. To me, they were scheming, plotting, especially Mabel. She kept eyeballing the inflatable yoga dome like it was some alien spacecraft she might have to body slam into next week. Back at the barn, Jimmy ran a full check on the horns. He wore earmuffs and a serious face like this was a military drill. He brought 4 horns, each tuned to a slightly different tone. Said the variety increased bovine disarray. I had no idea if that was true, but the man's boots were already covered in cow pies and his eyes gleamed with chaos. So I trusted him. June showed up with 2 folding chairs and a whole cooler of snacks. She'd already texted half the county. Soon, neighbors wandered over, some under the guise of checking fence lines, others pretending to inspect barn beams. None of us believed the HOA had any right to be there. But nobody wanted to stop the show either. This wasn't just revenge. This was a rural re-education, a cultural reset, a reality check for folks who thought boundaries meant HOA fences and fine print. By midday, the HOA was neck-deep in vision planning hour. Cornita stood beneath the glittery noodle arch, now duct-taped and holding a dream catcher, waving around giant whiteboards filled with erasable nonsense. She spoke like a CEO, thought like a squirrel. This quadrant, she said, gesturing toward my pumpkin patch, would be perfect for a cedar tub spa experience. Imagine bamboo fencing and eucalyptus steam. Someone in back asked, "Do we have eucalyptus trees?" Her answer? "We can manifest them." I was eating a sandwich behind the tractor when I caught Jimmy's signal. 2 quick mirror flashes from the loft. The cows had formed up. They were lining themselves behind the bait trail like it was a red carpet. Their path would take them straight through the northern edge of the HOA's tent kingdom. Mabel stood at the head, tail twitching. Buttercup flanked her. Daisy and the twins brought up the rear. It didn't look like a herd. It looked like a biker gang with hooves. Jimmy raised the first horn. I nodded. The blast ripped across the field like a sonic boom. The HOA froze. People dropped their yoga mats. Karenita's whiteboard flipped off its stand and smacked her right in the face. And then it happened. The cows surged. Mabel thundering forward with all the grace of a charging dump truck. Buttercup right behind. Daisy mooing like a battle cry. It wasn't rage. It wasn't speed. It was the sheer, unstoppable force of 30 cows on a mission. The HOA had no idea their spa day was about to turn into a stampede. By the time the sun eased over the treetops the next morning, the cows were getting antsy. Not mad, mind you. Cows don't do anger the way people do. But they were clearly curious. They'd been lingering near the encampment since dawn, loitering like teenagers outside a locked candy store. The salt licks had teeth marks. The molasses tub was basically cow-slicked top to bottom. To the untrained eye, it looked like just another lazy morning. To me, it was clear they were plotting. Mabel kept giving the inflatable yoga dome the stink eye, like it owed her money. I could tell it was about to go down. Over at the barn, Jimmy was doing a full system check on the air horns. He had ear protection on and was hunched over them like a mad scientist. He brought 4 different ones this time, each tuned to a different pitch. Chaos thrives on variety, he muttered. I wasn't sure if that was real science or clown lore, but either way, I didn't question it. His boots were already covered in cow tracks, so the man had clearly earned his place. June showed up not long after with a pair of camp chairs and a family-sized tub of kettle corn. She'd texted more neighbors. A few started arriving, ostensibly checking irrigation pipes or evaluating the structural integrity of barn beams. Nobody bought the HOA's story, but everyone wanted front-row seats. This wasn't about trespassing anymore. It was about teaching a lesson, a public, moo-fueled seminar in rural etiquette. By the time Cornita stepped back under the glitter-taped noodle arch for another vision session, the cows were aligned like troops. She gestured wildly toward the pumpkin patch with her whiteboard. This space, she announced, could become a Zen cedar spa. Bamboo walls. Private eucalyptus steam pods. A voice in back asked, "Do we even grow eucalyptus here?" She gave a dreamy shrug. "We can manifest it." I nearly snorted my sandwich. Then Jimmy's signal. 2 quick flashes from the mirror in the loft. The cows were lined up perfectly, trailing behind the bait like it was a path to enlightenment. They would plow through the north edge of Camp Enlightenment, right where the kombucha tent and crystal garden were set up. Mabel was in the lead, tail flicking, eyes zeroed in. Buttercup trotted beside her, and Daisy brought the twins up the rear. They weren't walking. They were advancing. Jimmy lifted the air horn. I gave a nod. The sound split the sky. The HOA froze. Someone dropped a smoothie. Cornita lost her mic as her whiteboard slapped her straight in the sunglasses. Then the cows hit. Mabel moved like a bulldozer in overdrive. Behind her, Buttercup let out a war moo. The herd surged forward, 30 strong. It wasn't fast. It wasn't violent. It was simply unstoppable. That was enough. The sight of stampeding cows turned the HOA's Zen dream into full-on pandemonium. Someone shrieked. A guy in white linen pants tumbled over a lawn chair into the kombucha cooler. A goat broke its tether and charged the sound bath zone, headbutting yoga mats and throwing off chakra alignment. One instructor ran screaming toward the trees, flailing like she was trying to take flight. Cornita tried to restore order, yelling into her half-working microphone. "Stay grounded. We are one with the—" She didn't finish. Mabel brushed past her, knocked over the welcome table, and sent the PA system flying into a mud puddle. The cows were living their best lives. Salt lick. Check. Molasses tub? Double check. Tasty solar lanterns? Bonus. Buttercup tangled herself in a hammock and mooed with delight. A smaller cow tipped the hydration tent and licked a bag of ice like it was sacred treasure. Jimmy fired a second air horn, just for fun. The HOA scattered. Some tried to reach their cars, only to realize they were blocked in by the same zucchini they'd crushed earlier. Others bolted for the woods. One guy just dropped flat in the grass, whispering, "I am the earth. I am the grass." Through all of it, I stood back, arms crossed, chewing a stalk of wheat. No guilt. Not even a flicker. They'd treated me like the outsider. Like the land was theirs. If being steamrolled by cows caused a bit of a personal crisis, that's a them problem. Eventually, the sheriff rolled in. Not because someone called him, but because his wife was watching the live stream and said he had to see it. He pulled up, got out of his cruiser, scanned the scene, and let out a laugh. Cornita stomped over, covered in cow spit, glitter, and possibly almond milk, screaming about biowarfare and agricultural terrorism. He nodded patiently, listened to her dramatic monologue, then looked over at me. "You pressing charges?" "Nope," I said. "Cows do all the work?" "Yup." He grinned. "Fair enough." By the end of the day, the HOA was gone. The tents flattened. Yoga mats abandoned. The noodle arch lay like a broken rainbow in the grass. The cows wandered back to their pasture, relaxed, a little stickier than usual, and very, very pleased with themselves. Jimmy packed his horns. June handed me a cupcake and declared it the best show since the Great Barn Wedding Brawl of '09. I tipped my hat, surveyed the glorious wreckage, and finally, peace. Sure, I'd have to fix some irrigation. Some carrots might have absorbed kombucha. But that didn't matter, because for once the chaos had been mine. And the cows? They'd earned every last lick. The field looked like a war zone. Lawn chairs scattered like fallen soldiers. Yoga mats fluttered like surrender flags. A kombucha keg dripped quietly into a cow print hoof crater. Somewhere, a Bluetooth speaker still played sad pan flute music. But the cows stood proud. Mabel kept glancing back at the field like she wanted an encore. I gave her a scratch behind the ear. She'd earned it. Jimmy sat in the hay, sipping a soda, smiling like a man who'd just seen the best show of his life. June returned with binoculars, a fresh chair, and a tub of kettle corn. She even offered some to the sheriff, who stuck around, just in case someone tried spontaneous litigation. A few HOA folks still wandered around, dusty and dazed, trying to process what had happened. But it wasn't just about cows. It was the collapse of their illusion of control. The HOA was used to winning with rules and newsletters. None of that helped when Buttercup chewed their board meeting notes. Cornita, covered in smoothie and sporting a literal cow lick, hadn't fully accepted defeat. She stomped toward me, clipboard raised like a sword. Two shoeless sidekicks trailed her, looking like extras in a farm-themed apocalypse. She jabbed her finger at me. "You'll be hearing from our lawyers." I stared at her for a second, then replied calmly, "You trespassed." She flipped her clipboard dramatically and pointed to a paper clipped on the front. "We were under the impression this was unclaimed communal land." "Your bylaws don't apply out here," I said. "This isn't a subdivision. It's private farmland, fenced, taxed, surveyed, and paid for with 2 decades of busted knuckles and 4 a.m. wake-ups." "But Rick," she started. "Rick doesn't exist," I reminded her. "And if he did, I'd sue him for impersonating a land fairy." She blinked, as if I'd just spoken Elvish, then shifted tactics. You could have seriously injured someone with those animals. You mean the cows you tried to feed incense and wrap in silk scarves? Her mouth tightened into a line so sharp it could have sliced zucchini. She turned to the sheriff. This was reckless. Endangerment. He should be cited. The sheriff scratched his chin, then gave me a lazy side eye. Dan, you released the cows? Nope, I said. Just left the gate open. They made their own choices. He nodded slowly, turning back to her. Ma'am, you were trespassing. If you'd like to file a report for being licked by livestock, I won't stop you. But as far as I can tell, no laws were broken. Unless we count goat napping. The blood drained from her face. The goat, now lounging in a kiddie pool someone had abandoned, let out a satisfied bleat, like he was backing the sheriff up. Realizing she was losing, Cornita made one last flailing attempt. We'll sue for damages. The tents. Our equipment. All ruined. June leaned in, voice dry as toast. You mean the stuff you illegally set up on someone else's property? The sheriff cleared his throat. Actually, ma'am, that might not go how you think. We've got footage. Live streams. Drone angles. Pretty sure any court in the county would dismiss this before opening arguments. That finally did it. Karenita's shoulders slumped. She lowered the clipboard slightly. We just wanted to build something beautiful, she muttered. For a fleeting moment, I almost pitied her. Until I remembered she'd tried to rename my pumpkin patch the Peaceful Rejuvenation Zone. I stepped forward. Look, I get it. You wanted a place to stretch, vibe, sip your mushroom fizz. Fine. But next time, do it on your own land. And leave the cows out of it. She said nothing, just turned and walked away. Her two barefoot lieutenants followed, each carrying a shoe in one hand and defeat in the other. One of them tried to salvage a folding chair, but it collapsed like a sad accordion. The sheriff gave me a casual salute, got in his cruiser, and drove off, leaving behind a dust cloud and a final echo of pan flute music. By that evening, most of the HOA crowd had vanished. A few lingered long enough to grab whatever wasn't chewed, stomped, or licked. Jimmy helped me corral the cows, who were still nosing through abandoned snack bins. June snapped pictures of the carnage. She was already planning a scrapbook titled The Great HOA Uprising. I finally got a moment to sit on my porch with Duke, cold drink in hand, breeze rolling through the pasture. The sun dipped low, casting golden rays across the now empty field. The cows lounged contentedly. The farm was at last quiet, until I heard the hum of an engine. A rental truck pulled into the drive. I stood slowly. A man hopped out with a clipboard, jittery with awkward energy. Hi, delivery for Dan. Daniel Miller? This is from the HOA West Neighborhood Leadership and Legacy Committee. My eyes narrowed. What is it? He popped open the truck. Inside, a large crate labeled in cursive, gourmet cow treats, grass-fed, lavender-infused. There was a note taped on top. I peeled it off. Dear Mr. Miller, on behalf of the remaining board, we apologize for the recent misunderstanding. Please accept this peace offering. Effective immediately, Cornita has resigned. There will be no more field retreats. Sincerely, HOA West Interim Chairwoman, Janine P. I turned to the delivery guy. Want to help me hand out some cow treats? He shrugged. Better than unloading essential oils. We spent the next hour feeding gourmet snacks to a herd of very smug, well-deserving cows. Mabel got seconds. Buttercup licked my elbow in gratitude. Even the twins got some, though one tried to eat the shipping label. As the stars blinked into view and the night settled over the field, I leaned on the fence and smiled. No lawsuits. No trespassers. A viral story flooding the internet. Not bad for a day that started with kombucha and sound baths. The cows had done their job. Nature had delivered its verdict. And my farm, my land, was finally back in balance. But I wasn't taking any chances next time. So the next morning I built a sign. Not just any sign, a declaration. I dragged out an old barn door, painted it red, and in big bold letters wrote, Private property. Trespassers will be stampeded. Below it, I painted Mabel mid-charge, steam coming out her nostrils and a flower crown flying off her head. Was it dramatic? Absolutely. Excessive? Maybe. Necessary? 100%. I mounted it to 2 fence posts and planted it right at the front gate. If anyone even thought about turning my farm into their next retreat fantasy, they'd get the message loud and clear. And for good measure, I built a scarecrow. Not for birds, for justice. I dressed her in a glitter shawl, oversized sunglasses, and a floppy sun hat. Named her Karen. She stood tall beside the sign, forever waving her clipboard in silent protest. Over the next few weeks, the farm settled back into its usual rhythm. The cows did cow things. I repaired the fences that got nudged loose in the chaos. Duke resumed his self-appointed squirrel security detail. In June, she started selling t-shirts that read Stampede first, ask questions never. They were a surprise hit at the county feed store. But what stuck with me most wasn't the wreckage or the memes. It was how many people said the story meant something to them. Neighbors I barely knew dropped off pies, chuckling about the live footage. Parents said their kids were reenacting the Great Cow Charge with pool noodles and plastic horns. Even the sheriff's wife came by just to say she hadn't seen him laugh like that in 10 years. It was a weird legacy, sure. I never planned on becoming the unofficial poster child for rural boundary enforcement. But if that's what stuck, so be it. Because if there was one message worth passing on, it was this. Respect is a two-way road. You can't build community on stolen ground. You can't enforce your HOA rules on someone else's land. And you definitely, absolutely, under no circumstances mess with a man's cows. As the last of summer melted into early fall, I kicked back one evening on the porch and watched the sky paint itself in purples and golds above the pasture. Mabel lounged by the fence, chewing her cud with the confidence of a retired war hero. Buttercup dozed beside her, her tail swishing in that lazy rhythm cows perfect over time. The scarecrow, Karen, stood proud next to the bold red sign, clipboard forever frozen mid-complaint. And the sign itself? Still standing tall, casting a long shadow across the field as the sun dipped below the trees. The farm had returned to peace. But just in case the cows were. The days that followed were unusually quiet. Not just the kind of quiet where the wind rustles through corn stalks and cows shuffle into their shady spots, but the deep, lingering silence that settles in after a storm has rolled through and everyone's still catching their breath. Word of the great HOA stampede had spread far beyond our little corner of the county. By the end of the week, local news vans showed up at the front gate like pilgrims arriving at a sacred site. Reporters interviewed June, who proudly named herself the official witness to suburban collapse. Jimmy gave theatrical retellings from atop a hay bale, complete with sound effects, interpretive dance, and air horn reenactments. The cows, meanwhile, went about their daily routine completely unaware of their new internet fame. Mabel, especially, seemed to enjoy the attention, nudging visitors for treats and striking a pose any time someone lifted a phone. What I didn't expect was how quickly the HOA tried to pretend the whole thing never happened. Their website quietly removed the annual wellness retreat section. Cornita disappeared from her leadership post with no farewell message, no official statement. Just vanished, like a sitcom character written off mid-season. In her place, a new president emerged, Janine. And to her credit, she seemed genuinely interested in making things right. A few days after the delivery of the lavender-infused cow treats, she sent a formal letter, on real paper, not HOA-branded stationery. It thanked me again for not pressing charges and acknowledged, in writing, a comprehensive lapse in judgment. I pinned it to the bulletin board next to my feed rotation chart and the faded photo of the llama Jimmy accidentally unleashed during the 4th of July parade. Cleanup didn't take long. Under Janine's watch, a few HOA volunteers returned to pick up what was left, trampled tents, glitter-coated crystals, soggy banners. They worked in silence, didn't make eye contact, and wisely kept their distance from the pasture. I offered them cold water and let them be. Some lessons don't require conversation. But the story didn't end there. About a week later, I got an envelope, this time not from the HOA, but from the local county fair committee. They wanted to honor the cows, with a float, in the upcoming harvest parade. Local heroes, the letter said. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my hammer. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, why not? If the cows were going to make a public appearance, they were doing it in style. With help from June, Jimmy, and a few crafty 4-H kids, we built a float. Okay, technically it was a rolling barn platform covered in hay, streamers, and a huge painted sign that read, "Respect the fence." Mabel and Buttercup stood tall, each wearing a handmade sash, field freedom fighter, and honorary deputy. The twins had sparkly hats, which they tried to eat. We finally settled on cow-safe crowns made of woven grass and ribbon. We didn't rehearse a thing. We just rolled down Main Street, mooing and waving while the crowd cheered like we were celebrities. Jimmy walked alongside the float, tossing wrapped cow treats into the crowd. June held up a giant sign that read, Moo enforcement is real. People loved it. Some laughed so hard they cried. Kids waved signs that said, Cows 1, HOA 0, and don't mess with Mabel. Old-timers tipped their hats. And in the very back, I spotted Janine, the new HOA president, clapping with the rest of them. She caught my eye, gave a small nod. I nodded back. Truce accepted.